How are you? It's Dr. Muso. Today we want to talk about examination tips. What are you supposed to do when you enter into the exam room? When you're answering history questions, what are you supposed to do? Number one, when you enter the exam room, you are supposed to read the instructions. Read and understand the instructions. The instructions, they're usually written in front of the question paper. The instructions, they will inform you the time that you are supposed to spend on each question. Remember, we have to answer 4 questions. So you have to accurately budget your time so that you'll be in a position of answering all the 4 questions. So make sure that you read and understand the question. Number 2, you are supposed to use a good English. You are supposed to use a good English. Although we are doing a history, make sure that you write correct spellings. Make sure that you write correct sentences. Your grammar should be up to a scratch. Make sure that what you are writing, you are communicating with the person who is going to mark your paper. If you write an expression, or if you write something which the marker is not going to understand, it means that you are not going to score a good mark. So you are supposed to use a good English. Number 3, you are supposed also to write your name. Write your name and also your candidate number. Write your name and candidate number. I have observed that students, they just write their names on the first page, then they ignore other pages. So that on its own, it becomes a problem in the sense that when the exam is about to end, you are now going to start now filling in your name and candidate number, and it will take a lot of time. So make sure that before the examination, the invigilator will tell you, it's now time for you to write your name. You write your complete name, and if you've got 2 names, for example, Tinotenda, Tatenda, and your surname, write all those names in detail. Or you can send Tinotenda T and your surname. You also write your candidate number. Make sure that you know your candidate number and also your center number. Then, when you read these instructions now, you are now supposed to open your question paper. So when you open your question paper now, you are supposed to start reading the questions that are in that question paper. Usually in our papers in history, we've got 20 questions. From those 20 questions, you are supposed to choose only 4 questions. So from those 20 questions now, start answering the question that you understand. Start answering the question that you understand. Start answering the question that you understand. So, for example, e.g., you are seeing that you are in a position of answering question number 14. So, if question number 14 is easy to you, start writing question 14. Then you start answering question 14. Order is not important. What is important is for you to answer the 4 questions that are expected from you. So start answering the 4 questions. But as you are answering the 4 questions now, make sure that the English that is used in those questions, you are familiar with the English that is used. You are familiar with what the question requires you to do. You are familiar with the requirements that are expected from you from the question. So when you start answering the question now, don't write the question number 5. Don't copy. Don't copy the question. Don't copy the question. You are not supposed to copy the question. But what are you supposed to do? You just write the number. For example, number 5. You start number 5. If it's number 5A, you start writing number 5A, then you give us the answer. Remember, when you're answering part A, 5A, 14A, 13A, 1A, you only write answers as one-word answers. For example, list any 5 states that were in the Balkan states. You just say Bulgaria, Greece, Albania. You just give one-word answer. But in some instances, they can ask you to give a sentence. For example, state any 5 advantages of oral tradition. You now give the advantages of oral tradition. But in that format now, you are giving it in form of a what? Of a sentence. So it depends on how they are going to ask you. So if you are done with 5A, you write the answers for 5A, you skip one line. When you skip one line, you go to 5B. So you just write B. Don't copy the whole question for part B. So when you answer part B, remember, when you answer part B, the format that they ask you nowadays, they want you to describe any 6. They want you to account any 6. They want you to narrate any 6. So when a question like that now comes, remember, what are you supposed to do? You give a major point, then you explain. You give a major point, you explain. As you are explaining, you can exemplify. So you can be given a B1 for a major point, explanation for B2, or exemplification as your B2. It depends on the question that might come on part B. Or if they can ask you, describe the political and the social organization, you divide these two. You give 6 points explanation, 6 points here explanation on these 2 items that will be asked on part B. So it depends on how they are going to ask you on part B. Then on part C now, what are you supposed to do? They want you to give a judgment. Usually, your answer should have a greater extent and also lesser extent. Your greater extent, 2 or 3 points, they can be used as your greater greater extent. Then you can give again 2 or more points as your lesser extent. So you can say 4 points as your greater extent, 2 points as your lesser extent, 5 points as your greater extent, then 3 or 2 points as your lesser extent. Again, on part C, we don't copy the question. What are we supposed to do? We start answering the question. So this is what you are supposed to do when you enter the examination room. So as you are answering again, make sure that your work is neatly presented. Make sure that you are talking or answering what the question wants or requires you to do. For example, if you see that time is going and we are only left with about 20 or 10 minutes, then there is about 2 questions that you haven't answered. What can you do? You can give your answers in form of of points, but make sure that your points are complete sentences. Again, as you are writing part B, you write part B in form of a composition. Don't write part B in form of points. Why? Because if you give a point, your point might not be a complete sentence and you lose a lot of marks. But in the event that time is what is moving, you are left with about 1 or 2 questions before completing the examination. What are you supposed to do? You can give points. The points will be marked and will be divided by 2. But to avoid this now, budget your time correctly. After finishing your examination, you are supposed to check that all the sheets, they've got your name and your candidate number. You also make sure that all the questions, they are neatly presented. After finishing your exam, don't revise. Go home and prepare for another examination. So that is what we have on examination tips. Thank you so much. It's Dr. Muso.